So, Patrick, I tried to come up with a carpentry joke that would work.
Bum.
I think I nailed it, but nobody in the band saw it. I don't like it when Dwayne's not here to laugh.
Yeah, he does the laugh.
You kind of have a grimace and maybe a Okay, well, you probably know by now that Dwayne is not here, but I am, and Patrick is. Carl Franklin, Patrick Hines.
And that's the sound of all of our listeners stopping listening.
That's right. Turn it off now. No, Patrick, this is your show because we're
it is.
talking about the exploding pagers and stuff, and you have a lot to say about that.
I do. And they might not like what I say, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that later. All right. What's the first story about Ivanti here?
So this is kind of the run-of-the-mill thing. Ivanti fixes maximum security RCE bug in endpoint management software. We talked about this before.
Yep.
This is hopefully they follow up and, patch this stuff. Now is a patch available, and it's a remote code execution, or RCE.
Right.
And if you own this devices, you should have been waiting with bated breath for this to happen.
Yep.
And you should, this is really, I know we keep talking about this, but you need to have an inventory of everything you have. Because when I dealt with some of the really large companies, the Fortune 500 companies, we'd say, well, what do you have? And they're like, we have one of everything.
Right.
We have at least one of everything. We own this software and that software.
So where's your SBOM? And it's like, go to Google.
Exactly. Yeah. But even then, you need to know where it is and who's the administrator and what departments it's used for and whether it's connected to the internet. And that's going to become just kind of like SOCs, security operations centers, are big now. I think SBOM and tracking these inventories is going to be somebody or some team's full-time job in the future. And it needs to happen sooner rather than later, as we're finding out.
So this is a maximum security vulnerability in its endpoint management software, or EPM, that can let unauthenticated attackers gain remote code execution on the core server. So it's a software patch. And what was the CISA score on this? Did they say?
It's a 10.
Oh, man.
10. Nadia Comaneci.
Now, you're not a fan of 10s because it doesn't tell the whole story, right?
Yeah. An attacker who successfully exploits this critical vulnerability would have unauthorized access to the EPM core server. It is big. It is a bad thing, but it really depends on, is this exposed to the internet? Is this something? And that's really what, when we discussed it with Dwayne, that's the crux of the matter. If you need to have this out on the internet, then that's a big deal.
Right.
If you don't, then that means they have to first get on your network.
So the STW contagion score then depends on whether it's on the internet. If it's on the internet, it's a 10. Oh my God.
Yes.
If it's not on the internet, depends on.
Yeah, it's still. Yeah. I mean, Dwayne and the teams would love to have it, because it would give them we're done. Now we get to finish our report and collect our fee. That would be all we'd have to find to completely take over the network,
right? Or
at least to completely take over that system. And who knows what damage we could write. But it's...
So maybe a 5 on the contagion score, because that's kind of an average.
It's kind of like saying, if a murderer gets in your kitchen, those knives are going to be really useful.
Yeah, right.
But if they're not in your kitchen, then the knives are really like a non-issue.
Right. All right, good enough. Let's talk about Dlink, because we haven't talked about them in a while.
So it could be exactly what we just said for Ivanti if it weren't for the fact that some of these are so bad. Not because their score is so high, but they are. But there were 5 CVEs, a 9.8, a 9.8, an 8.8, a 9.8, and an 8.8.
Wow.
And the one that kills me is... they have one that's a 9.8 that's Telnet service is enabled when the WAN port is plugged in, allowing remote access with hard-coded credentials.
Wow.
So you plug in the WAN port thinking that, well, that can't kill me. And it does.
Wow.
Hard-coded credentials are the worst. You should see either when you install a device, it should prompt you for the password and have you set it immediately, or it should have passwords that are printed on the bottom that are different for every device.
Mm-hmm.
I still prefer the, hey, you're configuring this device for the first time, set a password now. That's a better way to go. And require it to be a long, hard password, have multi-factor authentication. That's a better way. But this is amateur hour.
Yeah.
I'm glad they fixed it, but, Dlink is not a high-end router, in my opinion, just because of these kinds of problems.
And they're mostly used in the home or home office, right?
They are, but welcome to the botnet,
right?
And ransomware is going more and more often, against the homeowners because they've run the well dry. And this is 5 vulnerabilities. Now, 2 of these are buffer overflows. And let's talk about that for a minute. I know we've covered it in the past, but it's always bears repeating. A buffer overflow is when a developer, sorry, Carl, does something bad by not protecting their input, taking a value in without checking, whether it's appropriate. If you just hand me something and I stuff it in the oven and I find out later that it was, 100,000 in cash and it burns all up, that's on me, right? I didn't check what you're giving me. Well, the same applies to variables. If I ask for your name and you give me 4,000 A's and then a script that runs in the execution center of the memory, then that's on me. And so that's what these developers did. They didn't check their inputs. They didn't check their values. And hackers can use that to cause the application to do things in it. It's basically a remote code execution problem. It's not exactly the same, but it has the same effect where the hacker can run the arbitrary code on the device.
Right. So big problem.
Not bueno.
No bueno.
So I would say what we do is every year we review our supply chain. Ooh, There's foreshadowing, isn't it? There's a little foreshadowing there. And we think about, the reputation of the companies that we're dealing with, whether or not they're, doing the right things, whether they've had incidents over the last, 12 months or 6 months. And we decide whether we're going to switch. And switching is painful. It's not, and can be expensive. We're switching right now all of our network gear because of a review like this. And unfortunately, that's the cost of being secure. And it's still not a guarantee of being secure because, you still have to make sure you minimize the attack surface, still patch these things. But it's becoming an absolute requirement, especially if you're a military organization. Again, foreshadowing. Or a political organization. So if you're trying to take seriously your security and you see this kind of thing, then Dlink's probably not something you should be using.
All right, one more and then we'll take a break. Broadcom fixes critical RCE bug in VMware vCenter server. Boy, the RCE bugs are just jumping this week.
And remote code execution. So recall that there's buffer overflows, which is kind of an RCE. There's remote code execution, which is I get to run my code. I get to give my code through a weird way, typically. Like I've got to pad it with a certain syntax or whatever. But I get your program to run my code.
Right.
Those are really bad.
Yeah.
Especially when they're unauthenticated and they're exposed on the internet. And then there's PrivEsc, privilege escalation, which kind of requires, like, let's say I have an RCE, but it only runs as an unprivileged account that doesn't have read-write anywhere and is restricted to a certain directory and doesn't have a lot of permissions. It's not a member of any real groups. If I can marry that to a privilege escalation, well, now I'm in business because an RCE plus a PrivEsc equals the easy button for hackers.
Yeah.
And so it's important to understand these categories, these classifications. One helps you with getting the code going. The other helps you with getting the code to run with something that's got some teeth.
Yeah.
So
okay. So this one, Broadcom, that's a brand everybody knows.
Yeah.
VMware vCenter server.
Well, Broadcom bought VMware.
Yeah.
And actually jacked up the prices on a lot there been some lawsuits and stuff. But this vulnerability was announced by security researchers during China's 2024 Matrix Cup hacking contest. And we talked about this as a very big deal. And I think we talked about it last week or the week before.
Yeah, I think so.
So they have a patch for it. And that's good news. This came out on the 17th, so a few days ago. And, if you got this system, you should have been, again, waiting with bated breath for this patch and figuring out, how do I restrict access? You should have gone through and made sure that all of your VMs and your VM infrastructure wasn't accessible from the internet.
Yeah.
And then, make sure that this vulnerability didn't get, but now patching is the order of the day.
I didn't see a CISA score on this. Did they have one? Did they publish one? I don't see it in the article.
I forget what it was. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. So it was between a 7.5 and a 9.8, which is, it depends on, I don't know that it finalized or whether that's, but some people consider it a 9.8.
Now, is it again a matter of the contagion score being predicated on the fact that it's on the internet or not? Yeah, it seems like this would be on the internet. Otherwise, why use VMware?
Well, so you could envision an organization that requires you to VPN in, and the VMs might be the VMs might be exposed to the internet, but the VM
server
system itself may not. I think it always, that's going to be a regular concern. Is
right.
Is it on the internet or is it not? Again, use my knife example. Oh, there's knives in your kitchen. That means if someone's standing in your kitchen, they could use them to murder you. Yeah, okay, but people don't stand in my kitchen, so I think I'm okay. Now, if I put them out, I put them on the roof of my car, staple it on, and then somebody grabs one and, tries to carjack me, that would be a problem.
Did you see in the news that you have something in common with Vice President Kamala Harris? She actually said, if anyone breaks into my house, they're getting shot.
I have to race the dogs. The dogs will probably eat them before I could get a shot off. I was at Bass Pro Shop and they had a sign. They said, if the dogs don't get you, my 45 will. I was thinking about buying that sign because I like a 45. 45 is my favorite pistol.
All right. Okay. You think we've made enough people mad, or should we go for more?
Oh, we're going for more.
All right. After the break, we'll be right back after these very important messages. Stay tuned. And we're back at Security This Week. I'm Carl Franklin. It's Patrick Hines. Dwayne LaFlotte is out sick, and unfortunately, he should be back.
Allegedly,
yeah, he should be back next week. Yeah, that's right. He's on a resort. He's on a resort in Monaco. Just sitting by the ocean and sipping margaritas, whatever they sip in Monaco. All right. So anyway, So apparently, there's a story that exploded all over the news, pun intended. It's a horrible story.
Well, before that, we got the police. Police dismantle phone unlocking ring.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Oh, you almost jumped the gun.
I almost did.
Almost jumped the gun.
I thought this was related, actually.
So this a little bit of good news. A little bit of good news. And then the bad news.
I thought this was related. I'm sorry.
So police, from Bleeping Computer, police dismantle phone unlocking ring linked to 483,000 victims. So this is mostly in the Spanish-speaking world. An Argentine man had a service called the iServer platform that would allow not only automated phishing, but would also help the hackers, the thieves, to unlock phones and get around the security and the lockout capabilities so that the phones could be resold.
Now, when I think of unlocked phones, I think of not tied to a service provider, so you could put in your own SIM card and use them for whatever. Is that what you're talking about?
I think it's that plus, getting rid of the
security,
the lockout.
Yeah.
Like let's say I have a company and I have a system, and I have a lost phone capability where I say, hey, this phone's lost, lock it down.
Right.
They can get around that, supposedly.
Wow. Probably also the ID portion when you pick up the phone and it either scans your face or you put in a code or whatever.
Yeah, it's all about getting past that stuff.
Yeah.
And so they would set up phishing so that they could get the credentials they needed in order to do this. And they arrested 17 people across Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Spain, conducted 28 searches, seized 921 items, and they found data that seems to point to almost 500,000, 2,000 bad guys using the platform.
Wow.
Targeting over 1.2 million phones, and basically they got over almost 500,000 victims.
Wow.
It's a lot of money, because if you resell the phones even for $100 a piece, that pushes the zeros up quite a bit. And so the good news is they got popped. the bad news is it's kind of whack-a-mole when you take down one of these networks, other people see, oh, wow, they made a lot of money. Maybe I won't get caught. And there are a lot of these bad actors out there providing platform as a service, phishing as a service, ransomware as a service. And we've been talking about that for well more than a couple of years, that's
sure.
It's the professionalization of this bad stuff. And the bad part of it lets people who are far less sophisticated to carry out these kinds of operations.
You know what happened to me recently? When I was in Vegas, I brought 2 laptops, and the reason is because I had it happen to one of my laptops once, and just randomly the screen turns black and big noise, and it something's wrong with it.
I mean,
it's usually
hard drives crash.
No, this is usually a memory problem. So
okay,
but here's the thing: like I went to the coverage place, the place that covered it. And they said, oh, no, it's still under warranty from the seller. And I looked at the fine print, and the seller is some reseller. It was sold in Amazon Marketplace because it was upgraded. So the seller bought it at Costco, doubled the RAM, doubled the SSD hard drive, and then resold it on Amazon. All right. So they're the seller, but they guaranteed it for a year. That's up. But I didn't even know that when I bought it. Like, I didn't even know I was buying something that wasn't the original manufacturer.
You mean you bought something and then someone in the middle of that process opened it up and did things to it?
Yep.
And you had no knowledge of that?
Nope.
Could imagine. What bad could come of that scenario?
I know. This is, I didn't even plan this.
Okay. So this is a really
just
good segue.
happened.
This is a really good segue.
It's a great segue, yeah.
So our last story, not to give short shrift to the police disruption, but our last story is the big story. In fact, I advocated for this with the whole episode, but Carl's like, no, got to talk about other things. So
you know what? I got as much time as you want to take on this.
Well, I think we got 10 minutes on this, maybe.
All right.
So for those of you who've been living on a deserted island and haven't ingested any news, a couple of days ago, a bunch of devices, pagers, ruggedized pagers started blowing up pretty much all at the same time in Lebanon. Horrible event. Killed
terrible
8 people, including a child. Maimed lots of people, hands blown off, big holes in thighs. I saw a picture of a desk that was particle board that one of the devices was on. It blew a hole the size of a grapefruit in the desk and down through. So,
and then the next day it happened with walkie-talkies.
It did. 300 plus walkie-talkies exploded. And I think credit has been kind of taken, but the world is pretty convinced that it was Israel.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because the people who owned those pagers were all Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is a militia in Lebanon. They're they're militant, but quasi-political. They're part of the military structure. They're under the auspices of the militias that are supported directly by Iran. They hold about 120,000 rockets and missiles that they routinely use to hit Israel in the north. And Israel's, said basically, hey, cut it out. And they've said...
And now they're kind of at war as of this.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Hezbollah really doesn't want a war with Israel. They'd like Israel to just go away and cease to exist. But they realized that if they ended up going mano a mano against the Israelis, they're done. They'll just cease to exist. It'll be horrible, bloody, and no one wants this. But they also know that they're very much outgunned. Iran's kind of in the same boat. Iran makes a lot of noise, but if they came down to a real war, their mountainous terrain is the only thing that could protect them. They really don't have the military chops to fight Israel or any of their allies. So Israel, if they did this, and I'm not. Well, I'm going to drop pretenses that they did.
Supposedly, they told the United States that they did it.
I think they might have told us after the fact that they did it.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't tell us beforehand.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of, because we would have tried to stop them probably. Or at least I hope we would have tried to stop them. So putting aside the escalatory aspects of this, putting aside this, if you want to be purely kill them all, let God sort them out towards Hezbollah, it was a very powerful message that they can reach out and touch anybody. What I've seen some military and political analysts say is it's guaranteed that Israel had people watching the hospitals, and they would now, if they didn't know you were a Hezbollah agent, they know you are now. Because what they did, or if they did it, I don't want to keep going this. I'm going to assume they did.
Right.
There's a company in Taiwan that makes these pagers, or at least that markets these pagers, and everybody said, oh, they're these ruggedized pagers. They're really good ones. And they were bought by Hezbollah to give to their people. But they really were bought from a Hungarian company that licensed those pagers like 3 years ago, licensed the ability to manufacture them.
Yeah.
And when they went to the headquarters of that shell company, because that's all it is a shell company, it only has 6,000 in the bank, and the woman who's the head, the figurehead, never manufactured anything. It's just a shell company. So someone manufactured these pagers on spec, and either that manufacturer, instead of putting a normal battery in, put an explosive in along with the battery and shipped out 5,000 units. And then, or the units were shipped and intercepted, taken apart, reassembled with the new battery. I think it's more likely they were actually manufactured to be this weapon. And then the walkie-talkies, I haven't gotten the details on that. So this is the horror of a supply chain attack taken to the final level.
Yes.
Right? So there's some people who are afraid that if we let China import cars into the United States, they might build a bomb into every one of them. And then suddenly you have 150,000 cars, electric cars, catch on fire all at the same time.
Right.
Which would burn down buildings and destroy infrastructure. And so that's the nightmare scenario. So you that might be hyperbole, that might be overreacting, but you got to at least ask the question. So what's going on here? So
this story talks about a supply chain attack, doesn't it?
Very sophisticated supply chain attack, yes. Yeah. But it is a supply chain attack, which we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with this? Well, Lebanon's in tough shape because they don't manufacture really much of anything. So they have to import a lot of these things. But you got to do your due diligence on who you're importing from. So, for example, the U.S. military, they don't buy equipment manufactured in Russia or China for their networking or their communications. They buy it from, U.S. military contractors or from, companies like Dell or HP that are more, likely to review this stuff. There's been some scandals and some questions about, was China putting an extra chip on boards that therefore would let them, spy on computers that were manufactured even in the United States? There's at least scrutiny there. If you're running this kind of organization and you think you actually have this level of enemy, you should have probably taken some of these apart and analyzed them. My bet is a TSA screen of just taking that little patch and running it over it would have caught this. But this is pretty advanced. But it also speaks to the fact that if somebody wants to hack you, they're gonna be able to do it as easily as you are trusting.
Right.
Of things.
Right.
Like we talked about your laptop.
Yeah.
And you didn't have control.
Now I'm very skeptical of it.
Right. And so that bargain is, I get this great bargain. I got this, this water for a penny a bottle. And, the bottle is lined with lead.
And it's got nanobots in it.
Or it's lined with lead and it's just poisonous. So, you got to be careful about how good of a deal. So again, I know we talked about this earlier. SBOM, inventory. If you don't know the provenance, there's a good word for you, right? Provenance of the things that you're buying, and that includes hardware and software.
In other words, the origin and the supply chain. Where did it come from?
What's funny is what would have made this scarier? A much scarier story?
I can't imagine.
There's one thing that I thought for a minute. I'm like, is it possible that Israel figured out a way to make an unadulterated phone or pager explode without putting explosives in it? That was scarier to me because that means every device is up for grabs.
Right.
The good news is that's not the case. For the most part, if you get the ability to completely control a device with a battery in it, You might be able to make it smoke. You might be able to make it hot. You might be able to make it catch on fire, but you're probably not going to be able to get it to explode.
Wow.
Expect more of this in the future.
A horrible story, but we need to get to the bottom of this because, and especially for things like I was talking about with the laptop, right? Did this company just upgrade the RAM and hard drive, or did they do something else?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. So we don't normally keep the operating system on a system that we buy. We only buy from the same vendors that that the U.S. military would buy from.
Right.
So we stick with U.S. military approved vendors. We buy directly from the manufacturer. We don't go through resellers because we're a security company. We're a target.
Right.
I say enough controversial stuff in a single episode to get people trying to get after us. But it's also a good get. If you can get the security people, then maybe you're better. But we present as a very hard target because we're very paranoid.
Right. All right. Well, that's our show. And Dwayne, we hope you feel better, and we'll see you next week on Security This Week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.